The sun shimmered on the surface of Lake Serenity, turning the water into a million tiny diamonds. Tall, whispering pine trees lined the shore, and the air smelled like fresh water and sunshine. It was the kind of place where you could sit on a dock all day, dangling your feet in the cool water, and forget all your troubles. Boats gently bobbed, and the occasional splash of a fish broke the peaceful silence. This was paradise for many, but for those living within the Lake Serenity Homeowners Association, paradise came with a price. That price was Karen. Karen was, to put it mildly, enthusiastic about the HOA rules. She lived in a pristine, beige house with perfectly manicured lawn and flower beds that looked like they'd been arranged by a professional. Every blade of grass was exactly the right length, and not a single leaf dared to fall out of place. She saw it as her personal mission to ensure everyone else in the HOA followed suit. Her golf cart, which she'd affectionately nicknamed the Enforcer, was a common sight patrolling the streets. She'd stop at a moment's notice if she spotted a rogue dandelion, a slightly crooked mailbox, or a child's bicycle left unattended on the lawn. Warnings were issued with the frequency of summer rain. "Think of it as maintaining property values," she'd chirp, though her smile never quite reached her eyes. Some whispered that Karen had a direct line to the HOA president and that she was single-handedly responsible for half the fines issued each month. Others claimed she kept a detailed notebook filled with infractions, categorized by homeowner and severity. Whether these stories were true or not, one thing was certain: Karen was a force to be reckoned with. She truly believed she was doing everyone a favor, keeping the neighborhood beautiful and orderly. Little did she know, her reign of beige terror was about to be challenged by a new neighbor who wasn't even in her precious HOA. A neighbor with a dream, a deed, and absolutely no intention of following Karen's rules. That new neighbor was Alex. Unlike Karen, Alex wasn't obsessed with perfect lawns or matching window shutters. Alex worked as a carpenter, his hands calloused but skilled, and he possessed an easygoing smile that could charm the birds out of the trees. He valued nature, peace, and a good cup of coffee in the morning. Alex had visited Lake Serenity as a child, spending summer vacations with his grandparents. He remembered long days spent fishing with his grandfather, building sandcastles with his grandmother, and falling asleep to the gentle lapping of the water against the shore. Those were some of the happiest memories of his life. As he grew older, Alex never forgot the magic of Lake Serenity. He dreamed of one day owning a small piece of land there, a place where he could escape the hustle and bustle of city life and reconnect with nature. He didn't need a mansion or a fancy boat. All he wanted was a simple cabin, a place to relax, read, and maybe do a little woodworking. For years, Alex saved every spare penny he could. He packed his lunch instead of eating out, rode his bike instead of driving, and resisted the temptation to buy the latest gadgets. His friends teased him, calling him the frugal carpenter, but Alex didn't mind. He had a goal, and he was determined to achieve it. He would often drive up to Lake Serenity on weekends, just to soak in the atmosphere and imagine himself as a resident. He'd sit by the lake, sketching ideas for his future cabin in a worn-out notebook. He pictured a cozy space with a fireplace, a big window overlooking the water, and a porch where he could sit and watch the sunset. He imagined the smell of pine in the air, the sound of crickets at night, and the feeling of finally being home. Alex knew that land around Lake Serenity was expensive, especially within the HOA. But he had a secret weapon: patience and a willingness to look beyond the perfectly manicured lawns and carefully curated communities. He knew there were still a few undeveloped parcels of land on the outskirts, places that hadn't yet been swallowed up by the HOA's ever-expanding reach. And Alex was determined to find one of those places and make his dream a reality. One crisp autumn afternoon, while exploring the less-traveled roads bordering Lake Serenity, Alex stumbled upon something promising. Tucked away behind a thicket of trees, just beyond the last row of perfectly manicured lawns, was a vacant plot of land. It wasn't much to look at, overgrown with weeds, a few scattered rocks, and a slightly dilapidated fence marking its perimeter. But it had something the other properties didn't: potential, and more importantly, a distinct absence of HOA signage. The land sloped gently down to the lake, offering a stunning view of the water. Alex walked the property line, careful to avoid the prickly bushes and the occasional discarded soda can. He could already picture his cabin nestled among the trees, a haven of peace and tranquility. The next step was research. Alex spent hours at the county records office, poring over maps and deeds. He discovered that the land wasn't part of the Lake Serenity HOA. It was an independent parcel, owned by an elderly woman who had passed away several years ago. Her heirs lived out of state and seemed uninterested in developing or selling the property. This was it. This was the opportunity Alex had been waiting for. He tracked down the contact information for the woman's heirs and sent them a letter expressing his interest in purchasing the land. He included a fair offer, based on his research of comparable properties in the area. Weeks went by without a response, and Alex began to lose hope. He imagined someone else snatching up the land, someone who would build a McMansion and join the HOA, forever changing the character of the area. Just when he was about to give up, the phone rang. It was one of the heirs, a friendly woman named Susan. She explained that they had been sorting through their mother's affairs and had just received Alex's letter. They were happy to hear from him, she said, because they had been unsure of what to do with the property. They appreciated Alex's offer and were willing to consider it. Alex's heart leaped with joy. His dream was finally within reach. Now came the hard part, navigating the legal process and securing the funds to make the purchase a reality. With the verbal agreement secured, Alex faced two significant hurdles, the legal process and the financial challenge. He knew he couldn't navigate the complexities of real estate law on his own, so he sought the advice of a local attorney named Ms. Evans. She was a no-nonsense woman with a sharp mind and a reputation for getting things done. Ms. Evans carefully reviewed the property records, the offer letter, and all the relevant documents. She explained the steps involved in the purchase, including the title search, the survey, and the closing process. She also warned Alex about potential pitfalls, such as hidden liens or boundary disputes. Meanwhile, Alex doubled down on his savings efforts. He took on extra carpentry jobs, working late into the night and on weekends. He sold some of his prized possessions, including his vintage record collection and his grandfather's old fishing rod, a painful sacrifice, but a necessary one. He even started brewing his own coffee to save money on his daily caffeine fix. The legal process proved to be more complicated than Alex had anticipated. The title search revealed a few minor issues that needed to be resolved, and the survey uncovered a slight discrepancy in the property line. Ms. Evans expertly navigated these challenges, working tirelessly to clear the way for the sale. Finally, after weeks of negotiations and paperwork, the closing date was set. Alex arrived at Ms. Evans' office with a cashier's check representing his life savings. He signed the documents with a trembling hand, barely able to contain his excitement. When the last signature was complete, Ms. Evans handed him the keys to the property. Alex was officially the owner of the land beside Lake Serenity. He drove straight to the property, parked his truck on the overgrown driveway, and walked to the edge of the lake. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow on the water. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and savored the moment. It had been a long and difficult journey, but he had finally achieved his dream. Now, the real work could begin, building his cabin and creating his own little slice of paradise, far from the watchful eye of Karen and her HOA. He just hoped she wouldn't notice him anytime soon. The following Saturday, Alex was back at the property, ready to begin building. He had spent weeks drawing up plans for his cabin, a simple one-room structure with a sleeping loft, a small kitchen area, and a covered porch. He envisioned using reclaimed wood and natural materials to blend the cabin seamlessly into the surrounding environment. He started by clearing the land, carefully removing the overgrown weeds and brush. He was mindful of the trees, wanting to preserve as much of the natural vegetation as possible. He then marked out the foundation, using stakes and string to ensure everything was square and level. As a skilled carpenter, Alex was comfortable handling most of the construction himself. He enjoyed the physical labor, the feeling of the wood in his hands, and the satisfaction of seeing his vision slowly take shape. He worked tirelessly, from sunrise to sunset, fueled by his passion and his unwavering determination. He started with the foundation, pouring concrete footings and building a sturdy wooden frame. Then, he began framing the walls, carefully measuring and cutting each piece of lumber. As the walls went up, the cabin started to take on a recognizable form. He made sure to follow all local building codes and regulations, obtaining the necessary permits and inspections. He wanted to do everything by the book, not just because it was the law, but because he wanted to build a safe and durable structure that would last for years to come. The rhythmic hammering and sawing echoed through the trees, a symphony of progress and accomplishment. Alex felt a sense of pride and fulfillment he had never experienced before. This wasn't just a cabin, it was a symbol of his hard work, his perseverance, and his unwavering commitment to his dream. He knew it would take time and effort to complete the cabin, but he was in no hurry. He wanted to savor every moment of the process, to put his heart and soul into every nail and every board. He was building more than just a cabin, he was building a sanctuary, a place where he could escape the world and reconnect with himself. He was building home. What Alex didn't know was that his hammering had not gone unnoticed. From behind the perfectly trimmed hedges of the nearest HOA-approved house, Karen's eyes narrowed. A new project was underway, and she was about to investigate. The following morning, Alex arrived at the property to find a golf cart parked haphazardly on his driveway, blocking his truck. He recognized it instantly, the enforcer. Karen stood beside it, arms crossed, her expression a mixture of disapproval and thinly veiled fury. "Excuse me," she called out as Alex approached. "Are you aware that you are in violation of several HOA regulations?" Alex, still groggy from his early start, blinked in confusion. "HOA regulations? I don't think so." Karen puffed out her chest. "Of course, you are. This property is clearly part of the Lake Serenity Homeowners Association. And I can assure you, that structure," she gestured dismissively at the half-finished cabin, "is not in compliance with our architectural guidelines." "Ma'am," Alex said calmly, trying to keep his voice level. "I appreciate your concern, but this property is not part of the HOA. I checked the records myself. I own this land." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Don't be ridiculous. Everything around the lake is part of the HOA. We have standards to maintain, you know. What do you think you're doing, building that shack? It's an eyesore." "It's not a shack," Alex retorted, his patience starting to wear thin. "It's a cabin. And I'm building it according to local building codes." Karen scoffed. "Building codes? That's not good enough. We have specific requirements for building materials, rooflines, paint colors, everything. You need to submit your plans to the architectural committee for approval immediately." She pulled a clipboard from her golf cart, already flipping through pages of regulations. "Let's start with the siding. Is that cedar? Because we only allow approved shades of vinyl." Alex sighed. This was exactly what he had feared. He had hoped to avoid any confrontation with the HOA, but it seemed inevitable. He knew he had to stand his ground and defend his rights as a property owner. "Ma'am," he said again, his voice firm. "With all due respect, I am not part of your HOA. I am not subject to your rules. This is my land, and I will build my cabin as I see fit, as long as I comply with local laws." He braced himself for the storm that was about to erupt. "I understand your position, ma'am," Alex said, striving for a tone of calm reason, "but I assure you, I've done my due diligence. I'm not trying to cause any trouble. I just want to build a small cabin on my property." Karen's face remained fixed in a scowl. "Due diligence? What do you know about due diligence? I've lived in Lake Serenity for 15 years, and I know every inch of this area. And every inch is subject to the HOA." Alex sighed, realizing that words alone wouldn't suffice. Okay, he said, turning toward his truck. Let me get something. Maybe this will clear things up. He retrieved a large, official-looking document from his glove compartment, his property deed. He walked back to Karen and presented it to her. This, Alex explained, pointing to the embossed seal and the legal description, is the deed to this property. It clearly states that I, Alexander Miller, am the legal owner. And it also shows the property boundaries, which are outside the jurisdiction of the Lake Serenity Homeowners Association. He held the deed open for her, patiently waiting for her to read it. Karen reluctantly took the document, her eyes scanning the fine print. She frowned, her lips pursed in concentration. Alex could practically see the wheels turning in her head as she tried to reconcile the official document with her preconceived notions. She read through the legal description, muttering to herself about section numbers and plat maps. She then focused on the owner's name, confirming that it indeed read Alexander Miller. Her expression shifted slightly, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. Well, she said finally, handing the deed back to Alex, that doesn't mean anything. The HOA boundaries might have been extended since that document was issued. You need to check with the HOA president. He'll confirm that you're subject to our rules. Alex took the deed back, resisting the urge to roll his eyes. He had hoped that presenting concrete evidence would resolve the issue, but it seemed Karen was determined to cling to her assumptions. He knew this was just the beginning of a long and frustrating battle. Ma'am, with all due respect, I've already done my research. This deed is current and valid. I am not in your HOA. It's not up for debate, Karen stated, her voice rising in pitch. Whether you think you're in the HOA or not, you're benefiting from our community. Our pristine landscaping, our well-maintained roads, our general sense of order. You can't just come in here and build some eyesore without following the rules. It's not fair to the rest of us. Alex rubbed his temples, trying to maintain his composure. But I'm not benefiting from your community. I'm paying my own property taxes. I'm responsible for maintaining my own land. And I'm perfectly happy with the way things are. That's not the point. Karen retorted, waving her hand dismissively. The point is, we have standards. And those standards apply to everyone near Lake Serenity. Even if you're not officially a member, you still need to respect our guidelines. Respect your guidelines? Alex repeated, incredulous. I'm respecting the law. I'm respecting property rights. What I'm not respecting is your attempt to bully me into following rules that don't apply to me. Karen glared at him, her eyes blazing with indignation. Bully you? I'm not bullying you. I'm simply trying to uphold the standards of our community. And if that means enforcing the rules, then so be it. She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. Look, she said, her voice softening slightly, I'm sure you're a nice person. And I'm sure you have good intentions. But you need to understand that Lake Serenity is a special place. And it's special because we all work together to maintain its beauty and order. If everyone just did whatever they wanted, it would be chaos. But that's not what I'm doing. Alex protested. I'm building a simple cabin, according to code. I'm not causing any harm. I'm not creating any chaos. I'm just trying to live my life in peace. It doesn't matter, Karen insisted, shaking her head. You still need to follow the rules. Everyone does. Now, I'm going to need you to submit your building plans to the architectural committee within the next 24 hours. If I don't receive them, I'll be forced to take further action. With that, she turned on her heel, hopped into her golf cart, and sped away, leaving Alex standing alone on his property, feeling frustrated and defeated. He knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Later that afternoon, after a few hours of frustrated hammering, Alex decided he couldn't let Karen's threats hang over him. He needed to try one more time to reason with her, to make her understand his position. He knew it was a long shot, but he felt he owed it to himself to try. He walked over to Karen's house, taking a deep breath to steel himself for another confrontation. He rang the doorbell, and after a moment, Karen opened the door, her expression guarded. "What do you want?" she asked, her tone icy. "I just wanted to talk," Alex said, trying to sound as reasonable as possible. "I know we got off on the wrong foot this morning, but I really want you to understand where I'm coming from." Karen sighed, but reluctantly stepped aside to let him in. The inside of her house was exactly as he expected, immaculate, perfectly organized, and utterly devoid of personality. "Look," Alex began, "I understand that you care about Lake Serenity and that you want to maintain its standards. But I'm not trying to undermine those standards. I'm just trying to build a small cabin on my own property. A cabin that's in compliance with all local laws and regulations." He paused, trying to find the right words to convey his point. "I've researched the legal boundaries of the HOA. I know that my property is not included. I have a deed that proves it. I'm not trying to break any rules or cause any trouble. I just want to exercise my rights as a landowner." He continued, "Think about it. I bought this land with my own hard-earned money. I went through all the proper legal channels. I obtained all the necessary permits. I'm following all the rules that apply to me. Why should I be forced to comply with rules that don't apply to me, just because you think I should?" He looked at Karen, hoping to see a glimmer of understanding in her eyes. "I'm not your enemy," he said softly. "I'm just a guy who wants to build a cabin on his own land and live in peace. Can't you respect that?" Karen listened patiently, her expression unreadable. When Alex finished speaking, she remained silent for a moment, as if carefully considering her response. "I appreciate you coming over to talk," she said finally, her voice slightly less harsh than before. "But I still believe that you need to follow the HOA rules. It's not about you personally. It's about maintaining the standards of our community. And those standards apply to everyone near Lake Serenity." Alex knew then that he had failed. He had tried to reason with her, to appeal to her sense of fairness, but it was no use. Karen was too entrenched in her beliefs, too committed to her vision of Lake Serenity, to see things from his perspective. He had no choice but to prepare for a long and difficult fight. "Thank you for your time," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. He turned and walked out of her house, knowing that the battle had just begun. True to her word, Karen didn't let the matter drop. The next day, Alex noticed a marked increase in traffic near his property. Golf carts, driven by stern-faced individuals, would slowly cruise past, their occupants casting disapproving glances at his cabin. He even saw a few people taking pictures, presumably to document his violations. Karen had clearly rallied the troops. She had transformed his cabin from a personal project into a neighborhood scandal. He soon learned that she was actively spreading rumors about him and his construction. "He's using unapproved materials," she told anyone who would listen. "He's probably not even following building codes. It's going to be a safety hazard." She also questioned his intentions. Who is this Alex Miller, anyway? Where did he come from? What's he planning to do with that cabin? Is he going to rent it out to riffraff? Is he going to throw wild parties and disturb the peace? She painted a picture of Alex as a disruptive outsider, a threat to the idyllic harmony of Lake Serenity. Her efforts were surprisingly effective. Many HOA members, swayed by her passionate rhetoric and their own inherent fear of change, began to view Alex with suspicion and hostility. Alex overheard snippets of conversations as he worked on his cabin. "Did you hear about that new guy? The one building that thing near the lake? I heard he's planning to paint it bright purple. We need to do something about this. Before it's too late." He felt increasingly isolated and unwelcome. The sense of peace and tranquility he had hoped to find at Lake Serenity was rapidly dissipating, replaced by anxiety and frustration. He knew he needed to take action to protect his rights and defend his reputation. But he wasn't sure what to do. Karen's influence was powerful, and the HOA members seemed determined to make his life as difficult as possible. He realized this was no longer just about building a cabin, it was about standing up to injustice and defending his right to live his life as he saw fit, without being bullied by Karen and her HOA. He dreaded what Karen would do next. He knew she wouldn't stop here. The harassment started subtly but quickly escalated. Alex began receiving anonymous noise complaints, even when he wasn't working on the cabin. He'd be sitting inside, reading a book, and a sheriff's deputy would show up at his door, informing him that a neighbor had complained about loud construction noise. The deputies, initially polite, grew increasingly weary of the constant calls. They knew Alex wasn't part of the HOA and that he was following local noise ordinances, but they were obligated to respond to every complaint. Then came the accusations. Karen, emboldened by her success in turning the community against Alex, started making more direct claims. She accused him of dumping construction debris in the lake, of violating environmental regulations, and even of operating a commercial business without a permit. These accusations were completely unfounded, but they were enough to trigger investigations by various local agencies. Alex had to spend hours responding to inquiries, providing documentation, and proving his innocence. The process was time-consuming, stressful, and expensive. He even found nails scattered in his driveway, presumably to damage his tires. He installed security cameras, but the culprit remained elusive. The constant harassment took a toll on Alex. He found it difficult to focus on his work, his sleep was disrupted, and his overall sense of well-being suffered. He started to question whether his dream of owning a cabin at Lake Serenity was worth all the trouble. One evening, as he was sitting on the porch of his unfinished cabin, watching the sunset, he received a particularly nasty phone call. It was an anonymous caller, spewing hateful insults and threatening to vandalize his property. That was the last straw. Alex realized he couldn't continue to endure this abuse. He needed to take decisive action to protect himself and his property. He knew he couldn't fight Karen and the HOA on his own. He needed help. He needed a lawyer. He needed to fight back. He thought of Ms. Evans, the lawyer who helped him buy the land. He hoped she could help him now. He knew this was going to be a long and expensive battle, but he was determined to win. He wouldn't let Karen and her HOA bullies drive him away from his dream. The next morning, Alex made an appointment with Ms. Evans. He gathered all the relevant documents, his property deed, copies of the noise complaints, records of the agency investigations, and even photographs of the nails scattered in his driveway. He explained the situation to Ms. Evans, detailing the harassment he had been subjected to and the rumors Karen had been spreading. He emphasized that he was not part of the HOA and that he was simply trying to build a cabin on his own property, following all applicable laws and regulations. Ms. Evans listened intently, her expression growing increasingly serious. She had dealt with HOA disputes before, but this seemed particularly egregious. "This is unacceptable, Alex," she said firmly. "You have a right to enjoy your property without being subjected to this kind of harassment. We need to take action to protect your rights." She explained the legal options available to him, including sending a cease and desist letter to Karen and the HOA, filing a lawsuit for harassment and defamation, and seeking a restraining order to prevent them from interfering with his construction. Alex felt a surge of relief knowing that he had someone on his side, someone who understood his rights and was willing to fight for him. He decided to move forward with the cease and desist letter. He hoped that a formal legal warning would be enough to deter Karen and the HOA from continuing their harassment. Ms. Evans assured him that she would draft a strong and unambiguous letter, clearly outlining the legal boundaries of the HOA and warning them of the potential consequences of their actions. She also advised him to keep detailed records of all future incidents of harassment, including dates, times, and descriptions of the events. As Alex left Ms. Evans' office, he felt a renewed sense of hope. He knew the legal battle would be challenging and expensive, but he was determined to see it through. He wouldn't let Karen and her HOA bullies drive him away from his dream. He was ready to fight for his rights, his property, and his peace of mind. He just hoped it wouldn't escalate further. He still needed to finish building his cabin. A few days later, Ms. Evans sent the cease and desist letter to Karen and the Lake Serenity Homeowners Association. The letter was a meticulously crafted legal document, leaving no room for misinterpretation. It clearly stated that Alex Miller was the legal owner of the property located at address, and that this property was not subject to the rules and regulations of the Lake Serenity Homeowners Association. The letter included a copy of Alex's property deed as evidence. It detailed the history of harassment Alex had endured, including the false noise complaints, the unfounded accusations, and the acts of vandalism. It asserted that Karen and the HOA were engaged in a campaign to intimidate and harass Alex, interfering with his right to enjoy his property. The letter demanded that Karen and the HOA immediately cease and desist from all further acts of harassment, including spreading false rumors, filing frivolous complaints, and interfering with Alex's construction. It warned them that if they failed to comply, Alex would pursue all available legal remedies, including filing a lawsuit for harassment, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Ms. Evans sent the letter via certified mail, return receipt requested, ensuring that Karen and the HOA would be required to acknowledge receipt. She also sent a copy of the letter to the HOA's legal counsel, putting them on notice of the situation. Alex waited anxiously for a response. He hoped that the cease and desist letter would be enough to put an end to the harassment. He imagined Karen receiving the letter, her face turning red with anger and frustration. He pictured the HOA board members, squirming in their seats as they realized the legal trouble they were facing. For a few days, things were quiet. Alex was able to work on his cabin without interruption. He started to believe that the letter had worked, that Karen and the HOA had finally gotten the message. But he was wrong. Karen wasn't about to back down that easily. In fact, the cease and desist letter seemed to have only fueled her determination to make Alex's life a living hell. She was just getting started. This time, though, she would take her fight public. She was sure the community would be on her side once they knew the truth. The following Saturday morning, Alex woke to the sound of chanting. He cautiously peeked out the window of his cabin and couldn't believe his eyes. A group of about 20 people, mostly HOA members, were gathered near the edge of his property, holding signs and chanting slogans. Karen, of course, was at the center of it all, megaphone in hand. She was leading the protest, her voice amplified and echoing through the trees. No to unapproved construction, she shouted. Save Lake Serenity. Uphold our standards. The protesters carried signs with messages like HOA rules for a reason, protect our property values, and Miller must comply. Some of them even had signs depicting Alex's cabin with a large red X through it. Alex felt a mixture of anger, frustration, and disbelief. He couldn't believe Karen would stoop so low as to organize a public protest to intimidate him. He knew she was trying to pressure him into giving up, to force him to comply with the HOA rules, even though they didn't apply to him. He watched as the protesters marched back and forth along the edge of his property, their faces contorted with anger and disapproval. He felt like he was under siege, like he was being targeted by a mob. He considered calling the police, but he knew that the protesters weren't technically breaking any laws. They were simply exercising their right to free speech, even if their message was hateful and misguided. He decided to stay inside his cabin and ignore them, hoping that they would eventually get tired and go home. But the protest continued for hours, the chanting and shouting filling the air and making it impossible for him to concentrate on anything. He felt trapped, isolated, and helpless. He knew he couldn't let Karen and her HOA bullies win. He had to stand his ground and defend his rights. But he didn't know how. He needed a plan. He needed support. And he needed to find a way to silence Karen's megaphone once and for all. He started thinking about Ms. Evans. Maybe she had some ideas. He decided to give her a call. This had gone too far. Ms. Evans was furious when she heard about the protest. "This is outrageous, Alex," she exclaimed. "They're clearly trying to intimidate you. We need to file for a restraining order immediately." Alex agreed. He had reached his breaking point. He authorized Ms. Evans to take whatever legal action was necessary to protect him from Karen and the HOA. But Ms. Evans also suggested a different approach. Sometimes, she said, the best way to fight bullies is to stand up to them publicly. Let's show them that you're not afraid and that you have support in the community. She suggested organizing a counter-demonstration, a show of support for Alex and his right to build his cabin. Alex was hesitant at first. He didn't want to escalate the conflict or create more division in the community. But Ms. Evans convinced him that it was important to send a message that Karen's behavior was unacceptable. To Alex's surprise, several of his neighbors, outside the HOA, offered their support. They had witnessed Karen's harassment firsthand and were disgusted by her tactics. They believed that Alex had a right to build his cabin in peace and that Karen was unfairly targeting him. They helped Alex organize a small gathering near his property, a peaceful demonstration in support of his rights. They made signs with messages like, "Support Alex, respect property rights," and "Leave Alex alone." On the following Saturday, as Karen and her HOA protesters gathered near Alex's property, they were met by a small but determined group of Alex's supporters. The two groups stood across from each other, their signs raised in defiance. Alex stood tall, his shoulders squared, his eyes fixed on Karen. He wasn't intimidated. He wasn't afraid. He had the support of his lawyer, his friends, and his neighbors. He was ready to stand his ground and defend his rights. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was determined to win. He had come too far, sacrificed too much, to let Karen and her HOA bullies drive him away from his dream. He just hoped that someone would see reason before things got completely out of hand. He knew, deep down, that Karen was only making things worse for herself. He just hoped she realized it soon. The dueling protests, with their competing chants and homemade signs, attracted the attention of a local news reporter named Sarah Jenkins. Sarah had a reputation for digging beneath the surface and uncovering the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. She'd heard whispers about the conflict at Lake Serenity and decided to investigate. She interviewed Alex, carefully listening to his story and examining his property deed and building permits. She spoke with Ms. Evans, who provided a clear explanation of the legal situation and the HOA's overreach. Then, she interviewed Karen and several HOA members, giving them an opportunity to present their side of the story. She listened patiently to their complaints about Alex's cabin, their concerns about property values, and their unwavering belief in the importance of HOA rules. But Sarah also asked tough questions. She challenged Karen's assertion that Alex was subject to the HOA rules, pointing out the evidence to the contrary. She questioned the HOA members about the harassment Alex had endured, asking them if they thought it was fair or justified. After conducting her interviews, Sarah spent several days researching the history of the Lake Serenity HOA and the legal boundaries of the surrounding properties. She discovered that Alex's land had indeed been excluded from the HOA's jurisdiction decades ago, and that Karen and the HOA members were well aware of this fact. She wrote a detailed and balanced article, presenting all sides of the story but ultimately highlighting the absurdity of the HOA's overreach. She described Alex as a hard-working carpenter who was simply trying to build a small cabin on his own property. She portrayed Karen as an overzealous HOA president who was abusing her power and unfairly targeting Alex. The article was published on the front page of the local newspaper and quickly went viral online. It sparked a heated debate about the role of HOAs in modern society and the importance of protecting individual property rights. It also exposed Karen and the Lake Serenity HOA to widespread ridicule and condemnation. Finally, someone was seeing the absurdity of the situation. Alex just hoped it would be enough to make Karen back down. He was tired of fighting. He just wanted to finish his cabin and live his life in peace. The aftermath of Sarah Jenkins' article was swift and decisive. The news story spread like wildfire across social media, generating thousands of comments, shares, and reactions. The vast majority of the responses were overwhelmingly supportive of Alex and critical of Karen and the Lake Serenity HOA. Karen's actions were widely condemned as petty, vindictive, and an abuse of power. People from all over the country chimed in, sharing their own stories of HOA horror and expressing their outrage at Karen's behavior. She became an overnight internet sensation, but for all the wrong reasons. Memes featuring her picture flooded social media, mocking her overzealous enforcement of HOA rules and her unwavering belief in her own authority. She was labeled a Karen in the truest sense of the word, a symbol of entitlement and unreasonable demands. The local newspaper's website was inundated with comments, most of them praising Sarah Jenkins' reporting and condemning Karen's actions. Many people called for Karen to resign from her position as HOA president, arguing that she had brought shame and embarrassment to the community. Even some of Karen's fellow HOA members started to distance themselves from her, realizing that her actions were damaging the reputation of the entire association. They had initially supported her efforts to control Alex, but they now saw that she had gone too far and that her behavior was jeopardizing the community's image. Alex, on the other hand, was hailed as a hero, a symbol of individual liberty and the right to pursue one's dreams without being bullied by overbearing authorities. People sent him messages of support and encouragement, offering to help him finish his cabin and defend his rights. He was overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. He had never expected his personal conflict with Karen to become a national cause. He was grateful for the attention and the encouragement, but he also knew that the fight was far from over. He still needed to protect his property and finish building his cabin. And he still needed to find a way to convince Karen to back down and leave him alone. He hoped this was the beginning of the end of his troubles. He just wanted peace. He wanted to build his cabin. He wanted to live his life. Was that too much to ask? The fallout from the news story reached the highest levels of the Lake Serenity Homeowners Association. The HOA board members, realizing the extent of the damage to their reputation, held an emergency meeting to discuss the situation. They were furious with Karen for her actions, which they believed had made the entire HOA look foolish and unreasonable. They had initially supported her efforts to maintain the community's standards, but they now saw that she had gone too far and that her behavior was jeopardizing the association's future. They issued a public statement, disavowing Karen's actions and apologizing to Alex for the harassment he had endured. They claimed that Karen had been acting independently and that her views did not reflect the official position of the HOA. They also announced that they had launched an internal investigation into Karen's conduct and that they would take appropriate disciplinary action, if necessary. They hinted strongly that they would be asking for her resignation as HOA president. Privately, the board members were scrambling to distance themselves from Karen, hoping to salvage the HOA's reputation and avoid any further legal trouble. They realized that Alex had a strong case against them and that they could be held liable for Karen's actions. They contacted Ms. Evans, Alex's lawyer, and offered to settle the dispute out of court. They promised to cease all harassment of Alex, to respect his property rights, and to refrain from interfering with his construction. They even offered to pay for some of his legal expenses. Alex was skeptical of the HOA's sudden change of heart. He knew that they were only acting out of self-preservation, trying to avoid further embarrassment and legal liability. But he also realized that a settlement would be the quickest and easiest way to resolve the conflict and allow him to finish building his cabin. He instructed Ms. Evans to negotiate a settlement agreement that would protect his rights and ensure that he would be left alone to enjoy his property in peace. He was tired of fighting. He just wanted to move on with his life. He hoped that Karen would finally get the message and leave him alone. But he wasn't counting on it. He knew that Karen was a force to be reckoned with and that she wouldn't give up without a fight. He steeled himself for whatever she might do next. The settlement agreement was finalized a few weeks later. The Lake Serenity Homeowners Association agreed to pay Alex a sum of money to cover his legal expenses and compensate him for the harassment he had endured. They also issued a formal apology, acknowledging that Alex's property was not subject to the HOA's rules and regulations. As part of the agreement, Karen was forced to resign from her position as HOA president. She was also required to attend anger management counseling and to refrain from contacting Alex or interfering with his construction in any way. But the most significant part of the agreement was a public statement that Karen was required to make, acknowledging Alex's legal ownership of the property and the HOA's lack of authority over him. The statement was carefully worded to avoid any admission of wrongdoing on Karen's part, but it was clear that she was finally backing down. The statement was read aloud at a public meeting of the HOA, with Alex and Ms. Evans in attendance. Karen stood at the podium, her face pale and her voice trembling, as she reluctantly read the words that had been prepared for her. "I, Karen Miller," she said, "acknowledge that Alexander Miller is the legal owner of the property located at address, and that this property is not subject to the rules and regulations of the Lake Serenity Homeowners Association. I apologize for any inconvenience or distress that my actions may have caused Mr. Miller, and I pledge to refrain from any further interference with his construction or enjoyment of his property." As she finished reading the statement, a wave of relief washed over Alex. It was finally over. He had won. He had stood up to Karen and the HOA bullies and had emerged victorious. He had protected his rights, defended his property, and preserved his dream. He looked at Karen, standing defeated and humiliated at the podium. He felt a pang of sympathy for her. He knew that she had acted out of a genuine desire to protect her community, even if her methods had been misguided and excessive. He hoped that she would learn from her mistakes and find a way to move on with her life. But he also knew that he had done the right thing by standing up to her. He had sent a message that bullies cannot be allowed to win, that individual rights must be protected, and that everyone deserves to be treated with fairness and respect. As he walked out of the meeting with Ms. Evans, he felt a sense of closure and satisfaction. He was finally free to finish building his cabin and enjoy his little slice of paradise at Lake Serenity. He just hoped Karen would stay far, far away. With the settlement behind him, Alex was finally able to focus on finishing his cabin. He worked tirelessly, putting his heart and soul into every nail and every board. He used reclaimed wood and natural materials, blending the cabin seamlessly into the surrounding environment. He built a cozy fireplace, a big window overlooking the lake, and a porch where he could sit and watch the sunset. He furnished the cabin with simple, comfortable furniture, creating a warm and inviting space. Finally, after months of hard work, the cabin was complete. Alex stood on the porch, admiring his creation. It was exactly what he had dreamed of, a peaceful sanctuary, a place to escape the world and reconnect with nature. He spent his days hiking in the woods, fishing in the lake, and reading by the fire. He enjoyed the solitude and the tranquility, the feeling of finally being home. He rarely saw Karen anymore. She had retreated into her house, rarely venturing out. The HOA members, chastened by the experience, left him alone. They had learned a valuable lesson about respecting property rights and individual liberty. Alex often thought about the events of the past year. He had learned a lot about the importance of standing up for his rights, even when it was difficult or uncomfortable. He had discovered the strength and resilience he never knew he possessed. He also realized that there were good people in the world, people who were willing to support him and fight for what was right. He was grateful for the help he had received from Ms. Evans, his friendly neighbors, and even the local news reporter, Sarah Jenkins. As he sat on his porch, watching the sunset paint the sky with vibrant colors, he felt a sense of peace and contentment he had never experienced before. He had overcome adversity, conquered his fears, and achieved his dream. He was finally home. He knew that life wouldn't always be easy, that there would be challenges and setbacks along the way. But he also knew that he had the strength and the courage to face whatever life threw at him. He had learned the most important lesson of all, that he was the master of his own destiny and that he had the power to create the life he wanted to live. And as the stars began to twinkle above Lake Serenity, Alex smiled, knowing that his little cabin by the lake was more than just a building. It was a symbol of his triumph, a testament to his spirit, and a reminder that anything is possible if you believe in yourself and never give up on your dreams. The end.